end of an awesome year in country music is upon us, and that means it is time to count down the best country albums of 2022. I am somehow like a decade into making year-end lists in country music, starting in writing back when I was a journalist, now obviously doing it in video form, and what I'm looking for in an album at this point is just something that causes a reaction. There are tons of rock-solid country albums that have really nice music, they're pleasant to listen to, familiar themes, but on a list like this, the albums that stand out to me at the end of the year are the ones that provoked me, or surprised me, or shocked me, or made me think. Basically, I'm looking to be moved. That's what makes a great album to me. And there was more than enough of those this year. I think this was an awesome year for music. A couple ground rules for this list. You can only have one entry per artist on the list. Normally that would not be relevant in an albums list, but we got Zach Bryan out here dropping more than one album a year, so I'll say it for this. I'm only talking about albums that were dropped in 2022, nothing that came out in late 2021. And most importantly, this is just my taste. I'm just one dude listening to music. I'm not an outlet with a whole staff that can cover every single album, so obviously this is not comprehensive or covering every single thing that came out. But I still think it's pretty damn good, and I think we should just get started with the top 10. At number 10 is the John Anderson tribute album, Something Borrowed, Something New. I am surprised that I am putting a tribute album, a compilation from a bunch of different artists, onto this list, but it's just one of the standout albums I heard this whole year. John Anderson's kind of in this legacy phase of his career. He released that album Years a couple years back, and it was very solemn, serious, grave, and yet this one is much more celebratory in its nature. You're getting to hear John Anderson's classics redone by modern artists, and it's really the selection of artists that makes this album awesome. You got Ashley McBryde doing Straight Tequila Night, probably the most well-known John Anderson song, and she just kills it. Luke Combs' version of Seminole Wind is haunting and cool, and the organic instruments on it sound awesome. I hope he does that production style in his own music increasingly. Ever since the days of old. You got Tyler Childers, you got Sturgill Simpson, you got Eric Church, you got the brothers Osborne. I think one of the biggest surprises is Sierra Farrell's version of Years, which she takes from like a death march, a dirge of a song, into this kind of bluegrass ditty. Everybody knows you gotta let him go. It's just a cool album all around. You also got Nathaniel Rateliff on there, John Prine, Del McCoury, and Sierra Hull. Cool choices. It was produced by David Ferguson and Dan Auerbach, and that dude always makes cool choices, and I feel like that is really reflected on this album. So if you've never really dove into the music of John Anderson, but you want to know what he was about, maybe this is a great place for new listeners to start. At number 9 is Orville Peck's Bronco. So I come on, big long. Orville Peck's first couple releases were intriguing. I liked his deep voice that definitely reminds me of someone like Roy Orbison. The gimmick of not being able to see his face certainly created a lot of buzz, but it always felt a little bit like a gimmick. And I feel like where Bronco shines is really showing a more human version of Orville Peck rather than a character. That's not to say there's not a glossy finish on this record. Songs like Daytona Sand and Lafayette feel so Western, even a bit Hawaiian, and have a very lush, gorgeous, golden sound to them. And the soaring melodies on something like Come On Baby Cry are just epic. But it's not all bravado. You get so many more sensitive moments on this album, and that's what makes it feel more fully realized to me. A track like Hexy Mountains, where you see the weak side, the insecure side of Orville reflecting on his hometown, like that's so beautiful. And it lets you see him as someone that's not just this kind of vampy, naughty man flirting with other guys at the bar, but instead as a human, you know? And that's beautiful. Number 8 is Gabe Lee's The Hometown Kid. I left that town as soon as time would let me. Gabe Lee won Album of the Year on my channel back in 2020, and The Hometown Kid, which is his third album, is another great offering from him. This album definitely takes another step in the direction away from kind of the folksy stuff of Farmland, his first record, and more in the direction of heartland rock, and it's definitely an album about movement and about home at the same time, and how you want to get away from it, and yet you also really do feel like yourself there and have a deep, abiding love for home. And there's kind of this like reverent, religious, hopeful feeling about a lot of these songs. Now, I love the kind of rambly, jangly style of tracks like One of These Days and Rusty. I really enjoy his foray into almost shimmery 80s sounds on Kinda Man. But if you love songs like Eveline and Imogene from Gabe Lee, those kind of classic ballad moments, I feel like Buffalo Road is the clear crowd favorite, and it's definitely one to check out. I just love this guy's voice. I love his delivery style, and I am impressed that he has had 3 amazing albums in a row. At number 7 is the self-titled album from the Wilder Blue. I was so impressed with the Wilder Blues' first album, and when they started, they were actually a band called Hill Country. Now they are called the Wilder Blue, but they had songs like The Eagle and Dixie Darlin' on that record, and it was really notable for its incredible use of harmony. And if you're someone that likes harmony, this is the record for you on this list, because it is the shining star of the whole show. Harmony, harmony, harmony. Every song, it's like the Eagles, and I don't know. I was trying to think of some other harmonic band off the top of my head, and Destiny's Child, but that's a horrible, comparison. The band is fronted by Zane Williams. They come from Texas, and yet they're not as rocking as a lot of Texas country bands. This has much more of a bluegrass influence, and you're going to hear a ton of banjo on these tracks, which I think give it a kind of lighter feel. But it's also a very appropriate sound for the storytelling they do on songs like Ghost of Lincoln or The King Snake and the Rattler. Songs like Picket Fences and The Birds of Youth are just lush and lovely, filled with those beautiful vocals and a certain kind of nostalgic sound. But I think the standout on the whole album is the one big sonic departure. It's a lot bassier of a song, almost like a little bit of a Fleetwood Mac kind of vibe, and it's called Feelin' the Miles. It's just a song about being out on the road and really feeling the cost of being out there. But some of the chord changes are so unusual and cool and really show off the musicality of this amazing band. People got to get on board with the Wilder Blue because they are primo. And number 6 is Miranda Lambert's Palomino. I'm just a tourist. I don't know where. It's no secret to anyone that watches the channel, I'm a big fan of Miranda. That's why she's on the Miranda veranda behind my head. I didn't mean to block her in every video. That's just where I happen to place her on the wall. But Miranda has just kept her foot down on the gas, turning in another great album in Palomino. Even as she's kind of like graduating into maybe being a little bit more of a veteran artist in country music, she's still just turning out adventurous, great work. This album almost has similar themes to what I was saying about Gabe Lee's The Hometown Kid. There's a big theme of travel and movement on this record. Miranda doesn't like staying kind of hunkered down. She calls herself a tourist at one point on this record. She talks about how she's acting up. She talks about how she's a Music City queen. There's all of these kind of snapshots of various locations. She even does a re-record of Waxahachie. I think I'm saying that right. Y'all always make fun of me for it, but that was a song that was on her Marfa Tapes record, and there's a few songs like that that are actually in the mix here. She re-recorded Geraldine and In His Arms, and man, they flesh out the sound of this record so much because they bring a lot more gravitas. The Marfa Tapes songs are a lot more serious, but they kind of balance out like the fun, travel-y energy of the record with the sort of somber side of being someone that does move on a little bit too fast and does kind of run away from her problems or her men. There's fun moments like Geraldine, and then there is really beautiful, somber moments like Carousel, which I could wax poetic about, but I'll save you the time because it may be coming up in a future list video. AKA, obviously, you know it's coming up in a future list video. So you'll hear about Carousel then, but what a great song. My number 5 album is Fortune Favors the Bold by 49 Winchester. 49 Winchester is one of the buzziest bands in the indie country space. I feel like people are talking about them the way people in the past were talking about Charles Wesley Godwin or Shane Smith and the Saints or Whiskey Myers. Like, there's this buzz about them with the people that care about kind of independent country, and it makes total sense. They're one of the best bands. If you've ever gotten to see them live, I just got to see them in Greenville. Amazing. Lead singer Isaac Gibson has the most soulful voice, and it sounds even better in person than it sounds on the recordings. It'll have that kind of gravel and remind you of like Chris Stapleton. They're also Virginia boys, and gotta have some state pride here. And I'm so pumped that they're breaking out because this album, Fortune Favors the Bold, is excellent. It's kind of an album about heartbreak, but at the same time, resilience. And I feel like that's kind of how their music feels. It's like driving and strong in the face of being a little bit sad. Like, you definitely get some heartbroken moments on songs like Annabelle, songs like Damn Darlin', which is about a guy just kind of getting ghosted in Nashville. But then you do feel that resilience on stuff like the showstopper of a track called Russell County Line. And more than just soulful, I would also say that they can delve into like a little bit of funkiness like they do on the title track, Fortune Favors the Bold, which is really just about like, you gotta take a risk. Sometimes you gotta jump. This is what I played the entire time while I was moving out here to Tennessee. And so I think that song, you know, does something for me on a personal level, but it's funky, it's cool, it rocks out, it's country. I just think this is a really great album, and I want more people to know about it. My number 4 album is Jon Pardi's Mr. Saturday Night. That's why they call me Mr. Saturday Night. In terms of just a good time, this album is probably the biggest crowd pleaser on the list. If you have a friend that is kind of curious about listening to maybe slightly more country music but still needs it to be mainstream, I feel like you're not going to do better than Jon Pardi's Mr. Saturday Night of any of the albums on this list. It's not the most serious album. It doesn't have like a ton to say in a deep sense. It's about having a good time with some sweet moments, but it is a good time. And it's so damn country. You can hear all the instruments on it, and that's why I love Pardi. Such prominent fiddle, even piano, which can make it feel like theatrical and fun. You get all these guitar solos, you get his voice, which I think has a little more body in it than what you've normally heard from Pardi. I know some people say they think it sounds too nasal and high-pitched and sharp, and I'm like, I've never felt that way. I love how different his voice is, but it does have a little bit more tone to it on this record as well. There is so much steel that you're going to hear on songs like Neon Lightspeed or Fill Her Up. I mean, it's just all through the record. Slow and steady, step into the backbeat. The same can be said about The Day I Stopped Dancing. I mean, I'm just a fan of how Bart Butler produces music, and this album was produced by him and Pardi, as well as Ryan Gore, and they just make music that sounds good. And it's also got personality. I mean, it's hard not to laugh when Jon Pardi says, "I'm smoking a doobie on the Guadalupe." It's like the dumbest, funniest rhyme of the year. That's why I'm smoking a doobie on the Guadalupe. He's clearly having fun on a track like Reverse Cowgirl, which works ironically as like a sort of sex euphemism song and literally as just a heartbreak song. All in all, there's just a lot to like here, and I continue to just adore Pardi's vision for country music that really does sound country and really is fun and makes you want to get up and move. Before we get into the top 3, let me just go over 5 honorable mentions that I thought were really interesting albums, but they just didn't quite make the list. I would throw Ben Burgess's Tears the Size of Texas into this mix. It's the most recent album I've listened to of anything in this video, but I was just surprised by how many chances the production takes, and started a band just makes me feel excited. A lot of the songs do. It's unusual production choices, cool thoughts, cool writing. Noah Kahan's Stick Season was such a standout to me. And I know it's technically more of like a folksy singer-songwriter album than a country album, but whatever. I'm just gonna like gaslight Noah into being in the country conversation because I love this music. It's so good. And his whole kind of New England perspective on songs like Homesick and Northern Attitude and Stick Season is just such a standout album. Molly Tuttle's Crooked Tree really impressed me. I love the bluegrassy vibes, and man, this title track is one of my favorite songs of the whole year, where she's like, I'd rather be a crooked tree. I don't need to just be like, you know, the straight up boring lollipop tree. Oh, can't you see a crooked tree? Molly was just nominated for Best New Artist at the Grammys, which is crazy, but it's nice to see a little bluegrass moment. Ernest's album, Flower Shops the Album, was a big standout to me this year. It just was so much countryer than I was expecting. Tracks like Tennessee Queen, Classic, the song Flower Shops were really like steel-soaked and awesome. And Comfortable When I'm Crazy, Feet Wanna Run, he's got this real sad boy side to him that's quite vulnerable. And there's definitely some poppier tracks in the album, but on the whole, I found myself listening to that a ton in the first half of the year. I'm only comfortable when I'm crazy. And then the other one that I had as an honorable mention is Kelsey Ballerini's Subject to Change. I was just really impressed with this record, and it's kept growing on me. It is like the best version of what pop country can be. I'd cut a few tracks here and there, but the country stuff like If You Go Down, I'm Going Down Too, and even Little Things, and I Can't Help Myself, it just feels like the best version of Shania. So I was surprised by it, I gotta be honest. There are so many others I want to include here, but, you know, you gotta cut it off somewhere. So sorry to the other, 30 albums I had in consideration. But, yeah, back to the countdown. At number 3, and I am surprised I have this as high as I do, is Co Wetzel's El Paso. But to come to get the money. I said this list was about albums that created a reaction in me, and boy did this record the first time I heard it, because I've sort of looked at Co as an ironic character for many years now, and he's sort of playing into this poor decision-making, drug-addled, coked out, dark sex monster, former football bro. And yes, he is all of those things in all of his music. But on El Paso, it's like he started to feel bad about it, and this voice of shame kicked in. And it is this fascinating record where he almost recognizes his own darkness. To the point that he's saying, I'm so low, it's effing awesome. He's never been as down as he is, to the point that he's kind of marveling at it. And although the album starts in this bitter place post-breakup, and you get some of his trademark humor, it then kind of goes into this, fantasy land of, drunkenness and some kind of, Mexican strippers or something. It ends up in a place where he's going back home to Yellow Bush Road, and he really wants to be seen for who he really is. And I think the whole thing is like a drum roll leading into what's going to be Co Wetzel's first real country album. And as a prequel to that, as him kind of exiting this rock phase and going into country, I just think it's a fascinating concept record, and it really made me, again, see him as a human and not as a gimmick. And I think I must, really like that narrative. My number 2 album in 2022 is Zach Bryan's American Heartbreak. To you, I'm just a man. To me, you're all I am. What an epic album, and what a cool time to be alive that this obviously going to be iconic, American album came out. And how fun to have been a Zach Bryan fan for years and witness his ascent, and then this true, pop culture moment of this opus of an album getting dropped. I mean, it's 2 hours long. It's 34 songs, and it's just straight up poetry. Most of these songs don't really follow especially conventional forms, and the writing isn't formulaic. It's not like you're getting these little clever, very songwritery twists where, when something goes up, it's gonna come down, and it's gonna be wrapped up in a tiny bow like a lot of country music. These are kind of meandering, strange thoughts that this young man has had, and yet that's what makes it so beautiful. It's spare, and it's passionate, and it's weird. And it's Zach's way of delivering stuff, just this guttural, passionate, sometimes a yell and sometimes a cry, and I feel like you could really hear those emotions in the way that he sings that make it just hard to look away from. When you hear Something in the Orange, you feel like you are looking at the sun and wondering if your relationship is over. And alternately, on a song like She's Alright, you feel like you're looking at the moon and thinking about a loved one that you've lost. It's hard to sum up a 34-song album in a little blurb here. I would recommend going and watching my video, The Suspended Soul of Zach Bryan, but he covers all sorts of ground here. Sometimes on this album, Zach's being very personal, but sometimes he's telling stories. Tracks like Open the Gate are about, a kid whose father died as a cowboy, but he's kind of pursuing the same rodeo life, and he's gonna ride the bull anyway. On something like Billy Stay, he's embodying an old lady whose husband has Alzheimer's, and she just wants to bring him back to reality for a moment. Just stay here with me. And of course, I love the little shady moment on If She Wants a Cowboy, which ends up being a whole track that kind of roasts Nashville and turns into a whole auto-tune mess at the end. If she wants Nashville, I'll Nashville the best. The adventurousness of this record and the sort of non-conventional ascent of Zach make all of it so beautiful to me, and probably to you if you're a fan of this channel. I literally don't know how to sum up this record other than to say it just feels like this particular snapshot of a star in his prime. And the way it makes people feel, especially a lot of dudes that wouldn't normally be willing to wear their heart on their sleeve, is just so beautiful to me. But my number one album, my very favorite album of all of 2022, is Raised by Hailey Whitters. This album floored me the first time I heard it. It's unassuming and simple in a lot of ways, but I just think it packs such a punch, and I think it's completely country, completely fun, completely sweet, winsome, makes you think about your hometown. It's full of gratitude. It's just special. Hailey Whitters did something different than a lot of artists. Normally artists try their best to make some mainstream hits and then they make their artistic play. She did the reverse of this. She made these buzzy, somber songs a few years ago and then turned around and made the most cool, 90s inspired, sort of upbeat record with Raised. Tracks like Everything She Ain't really feel like what the Dixie Chicks were doing way back in the day. And a lot of this record feels almost the same as early Casey Musgraves. It really breathes, it's open, you get a little bit of playful banjo and guitar, lots of steel and fiddle. The instrumentation on this is gorgeous. Jake Gear, who is her now husband, produced this, and I feel like it sounds clean, friendly, pleasant, but not in the demeaning way of pleasant, like truly pleasant. And I think the imagery, whether it's of chert rock roads or pampas grass or, people stuffing their bras at the bleacher at a little high school football game, capture the mundanity and charm of her upbringing in Iowa. This whole album really is a love letter to the cornfields that she grew up around. And she also has 2 different songs on here that are kind of love letters to the men that she grew up around in a very sincere and different and disarming way. One is called Boys Back Home, and it just likes these sort of tough boys that have a pack of skull in their pocket. Another one's called Pretty Boy, and that's about like the little sensitive kid in the marching band that maybe isn't as macho as them. And she's just saying, I see you and I love you too. But then she does have that like confident, funny femininity on tracks like Everything She Ain't, where she's just sort of sassing this girl because she's dating the guy that she wants. And she's like, I'm everything she is and everything she ain't. And on tracks like College Town and Playing Jane, I feel like you get depictions of women that are a little bit more tough and strong and edgy. Really, the songwriting on this album, I think, is amazing because it's pretty simple and complex at the same time. A track like Raised, the title track, is so quietly smart. She says, I fall how I was raised, meaning the way that she enters a relationship is slow and is patient, and it almost reflects the place that she is from. That's a weird, interesting thought, And she just makes these observations that are full of humor and wit, and they're not cynical, and I love it. I love hearing all the stuff she talks about on Middle of America, when she's like, look, here we're not left, we're not right, we're just stuck right in the middle of America. I love the BJ Barnum feature on that song. Big Family is hilarious. Everybody Oughta has like a real down-home charm to it. This is a super accessible album. Much like I said with Party, I feel like this is one that if you got someone that's country curious in your life, you can play them this album and they're going to love it. And I like that they toured together because they both have that charm about them. But man, I thought about this album so much. I made a whole freaking video about it, and you should go watch that because I get way more into the minutia of Hailey Whitters. But all around, a beautiful album, a beautiful aesthetic. I love all the videos around it, the colors. I'm rambling at this point, but hey, it's my number 1 album of the year, and I'm allowed to ramble. So that's my list, you guys. Thank you so much for following along all year. Let me know your favorite albums in the comments down below. If you agree or disagree with my list, look, it's all just, personal taste at the end of the day. It ain't that big a deal, and I probably did miss your favorite album, but those are the ones that really stood out to me. So I'll be back with some of my favorite songs in a few days, and we're going to do, as always, the best hit songs and then the best kind of like minor hits or deep album cuts. But look forward to that, and I will talk to you guys very soon.